Hello, everyone. I'm Tom Del Beccaro, and welcome to Politics in Perspective. A Merry Christmas to you. Happy Hanukkah. And this is our year end show. So, a Happy New Year to you all. I want to thank Ex America News, WorldviewTube.com, and AUN TV for carrying us throughout the year, and our new channel on BuzzSCV.com. So, this is our year end show. We'll do a bit of a year in review from my perspective, and we'll look back at the 2025 predictions I made way back last year. Before we get to our difference maker, my good friend John Fleischman, we'll talk. I know a lot of people care about what's going to happen in California next year. It's a big deal. Gavin Newsom's been a disaster, of course. So, where does California go from here? We'll talk all about that with John Fleischman. And then we get to in the political roundup, my 2026 predictions. But let's start out, if we can, with the year in review. What happened in 2025? Well, obviously, the big news of 2025 was the Trump presidency, and he dominated the news. Excuse me. Affordability became an issue, of course, in 2025, which will carry over into next year. Doge, as you see from my graphic on the left there, we're going to talk about this in a minute. There's Elon Musk with Milei, the president of Argentina, who gave him a buzzsaw to cut spending. We'll talk about that. But for the first three or 4 months of the Trump presidency, it was all about Doge. And then on the right, you see Iran. And Iran had quite the year as well. Maybe not the year they wanted, but it was quite the year. So let's talk about this. At the end of last year, I said the two biggest dynamics, or the most meaningful, would be Doge, the Elon Musk coming in to cut spending, and the other would be whether Iran, the regime, topples or falters in 2025. So let's start out with Doge. I picked this picture of all pictures because at the start of the year, it was all about taking a chainsaw to the bureaucracy. That's what the Argentinian president said to Elon Musk, and he was all about it. This was at CPAC right at the start of the year. Take a look at the picture. You have Elon Musk there, sort of roaring his excitement that they were going to take a chainsaw to the bureaucracy. Why is that important? Well, at the end of the day, government spending from city council all the way to the federal level, you've heard me say this before, is 35 to 37% of the economy. Completely unsustainable, right? Where you got 38 trillion in national debt, you have these inflationary pressures. And what I mean by that is when you carry 38 trillion in national debt, when you have $2 trillion deficits, inflation is always just around the corner, or there's sort of this permanent pressure because the Federal Reserve has to print the money to make up for those yearly deficits. What does that mean? Well, it means they devalue the money and the currency becomes worth less, and that's where inflation comes around. That, of course, is how the Biden inflation came. You had them shut down the economy, you had them print tons of money, and that delta for a sustained period of time is what got us to 9% inflation. And it's been coming down, yes, but it's been sticky, they say, or persistent. And that was a big issue, of course. It's a big issue now with affordability. But the issue for Doge was, could Doge go in there and make a significant difference? There was this promise of trillions in cuts. There were hundreds of billions. So it certainly was a big issue for a considerable piece of time. But if you remember, the Republicans tried to cut something like 0.02% of the budget, and the Democrats lost it. And the Republicans caved in many regards. That was the big split up between Musk and Trump for a while, was that his efforts were going unappreciated and not followed up, meaning there wasn't this significant reduction. Now, we do know this: over 200,000 federal employees have taken leave, lost their job this year. That's a big deal. And why is it a big deal? And that is in keeping with Doge. It's a big deal because we can't keep spending, right? And under the Biden years, the way the economy was juiced up was government spending and government hiring. That's where the employment figures came from. So if you look at the last employment figures that we saw, the government sector dropped and the private sector went up 125, and there was a net in the sort of in the middle of that. That's a good thing because, as Scott Bessent wanted to do, he wanted to privatize the economy. He wanted the economy to be driven by the private sector, not public spending. So, yes, I was pretty much right that Doge would be at the center. It was for a long time. But this, even though it's fallen under the radar, the reduction in government employees, the reduction in the deficit, it looks like it'll be significant, about 20% or more. These things are good, necessary, and must carry forward into next year. So that was my first prediction. My second prediction was about Iran. Now, a year ago, there was talk about how stable the Iranian regime was and would there be regime change. They were, of course, the funders of Hezbollah. They were the funders or are of Hamas. They had allies in Syria, the Syrian regime, and they're the biggest state sponsor of terror in the world. There was talk, though, whether how much longer they could hang on to all of those titles. And the Trump administration did two significant things. By the way, my prediction, I should have said, was that the Iranian regime would be either collapsing or fully collapsed in 2025. So the Trump administration reversed policies from the Joe Biden era. Of course, Joe Biden made easy money for Iran, which allowed them to fund Hamas, fund Hezbollah, and fund terror in general. Trump dried that up again. He reversed the policy on restraining Israel. Israel carried out more extensive attacks. And of course, the Trump administration bombed the nuclear sites in Iran. And whether or not they eradicated it or made it impossible to come back, it did have a major impact. And so Iran's standing was severely hurt. Now, what do dictators do when they're in jeopardy? They crack down on everything. They kill people, they crack down on dissent, and they have certainly done that. But the problem with Iran, if they don't have access to international money by selling oil or getting money from Joe Biden, is that their economy is horrible. Most dictators' economies are horrible, right? And they're said to be running out of water. They don't provide the basics. And if we go back to that first slide, this is an opinion piece from where you have tyranny ends. You have a collapsing Iran presents urgent U.S. obligations. This is from Mike Pompeo, the former Secretary of State, and he makes an interesting point, or at least a point I think that needs to be understood out there, which is that the collapse of a regime doesn't happen on time. There isn't some sort of period where you say, okay, it's going to happen a week from Tuesday. It collapses sometimes in a hurry, like the Berlin Wall, which he talks about. And so it could happen at a moment's time, not necessarily in Iran, but that's how these things work. And then, like the Assad regime, suddenly they were gone in Syria and had gone off to Russia. So there's little doubt that Iran is far weaker as we sit here today than they were at the start of the 2025 before Trump got more involved and unleashed it not only hit the bombing of the nuclear sites, but Israel's ability to wage war against them. So, my two predictions, maybe they weren't the biggest predictions of all, but they certainly, I feel confident in saying that they certainly were a big dynamic in 2025. Even though affordability has become an issue, the Democrats are holding on to that. Uh, and the Democrats were trying to find their footing, but the change in the Middle East and the Trump reduction in the workforce, the federal workforce, are big issues, and they're important. And look, that's my opening statement. I hope you have a chance over my shoulder. Here are my two books. There's still time to get them to somebody for Christmas, The Lessons of the American Civilization. If you have questions on how America got where it is, what happened to its work ethic? What happened to its moral code? What about its religious beliefs? What about the family? All those questions are answered. How did socialism become central to the United States suddenly? How are we even having this discussion? How did Mondami come about? Why is there an AOC? All of these are answered in the book. It's an easy read. And of course, The Divided Era, a decade ago, I published, the book was published, but long before that, 18 years ago, I was talking about division in America and its source. And this book answers that particular question as well. So that's the opening amount. We'll be back on with Politics and Perspective and talk about California and why it matters it'll have a big say in 2026. I'm Tom Del Beccaro, and thanks for tuning in. Welcome back, everyone, to Politics in Perspective. Today, I'm excited. I'm joined by one of the pioneers of independent journalists and otherwise in California with respect to California politics alone. He and I have been, in our separate ways, have been doing this now for almost 20, 25 years. And John has been at the forefront of counterbalancing the far left media in California. And he has a new website, so doesitmatter.com. John Fleischman, welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm great, Tom. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate being a part of what you're doing here. And as you just mentioned to everybody watching, you and I have been at this for a very long time, and so it's great to be here with you as a respected colleague.
I still,
You know,
we were having lunch somewhere in Orange County, and you said to me, "You're the only one with a website. I got to get a website." And then you brilliantly did the flash report for decades, dominated the field. But you have a big announcement, so why don't you let us know what it is?
Oh, well, I don't. When is this running? So I don't know if I'm ready to make any big announcements yet. So actually, Flash Report's been flashreport.org, which you could check out, has been aggregating news in California for about 20 years. But we are we're officially taking it down after a 20-year run, mainly because of the enthusiasm for "So Does It Matter," which is actually pronounced "So Does It Matter." .com has really taken off on Substack, and so I've been doing most of my writing there, and so we're going to redirect over there. There'll be an archive there. We have over 25,000 posts on that site over the years. We've covered a lot of politics, and so there's a lot of rich history there. If anybody's interested in putting in search terms if you want to find out every reason why former Assemblyman Mike Valines was pilloried and removed from his leadership post in the Assembly. It's all there, much to the dismay of everybody. It's the conscience of the Republican Party in California. It's just harder to have a conscience when there's less and less of a party. So, but,
Okay, well, Flash Report was remarkable. I will miss it because I go there almost every day to find some unique story because you put so many of them up. And congratulations. So, Does It Matter is doing super well on Substack. You're a rising star there, so good. But let's stop talking about you and me, and let's talk about California. In the opening segment, I said that California is going to have a big say in 2026. Certainly, there's a governor's race here, but they also may have a say in presidential politics. So, if you would, let's start with that governor's race. There's a new poll that's out, if we can put it up. And that poll has an interesting person at the top and an interesting person tied for second. So you have two Republicans at the top of this very crowded field. Uh, so let's start, and of course, Katie Porter is local to you. So let's start with who do you think among the Democrats will emerge to be the top vote getter, and why?
well, I guess first and foremost, you're really asking me to make a prediction, which I will do. But let's start by framing things. This is a very mediocre field. Frankly, the only superstar, as I would say, and I don't mean that by superpowers and really amazing, but more like by national footprint, was former Vice President Harris was talking about running, and had she gotten in the race, I think she would have been a shoe-in to be the next governor of California. I think clearly such a complex task was above her. I don't think she wanted to be the governor of California. It's easier to be vice president to the auto pen than it is to try to run a complex state like California. And of course, Gavin Newsom is literally creating fires, political and real, all over the state of California on his way out the door. And whoever becomes the next governor is going to inherit a really big mess. As to who it ultimately is that's on top, I think that if Attorney General Bonta actually gets into the race, he becomes the guy to beat because, and I've talked about this a little bit. I think that all these kind of B-level candidates, and we could spend a few minutes and list them all. There's, a member of Congress, former member of Congress. There's former cabinet members, former mayor of Los Angeles. There's all these B players that haven't. None of them have really had a chance to break out, really. And we can't forget Steyer the Crier, right? So there's this whole crew of people. But the biggest factor in who's going to emerge as the top Democrat is going to be where our state's very, very wealthy public employee unions land and where they decide to spend their, I'm going to guess, $100 million, right? And this is a factor not only in which Democrat advances to the top of the heap, but it also answers the question as to why it's nice to look at surveys that show that, Sheriff Chad Bianco and former Fox News host Steve Hilton, they're in the 1 and 2 spot. Well, they're in the 1 and 2 spot until the unions ultimately decide, oh my God, we could have two Republicans. Okay, we're going to need to drop $50 million to promote one and defeat the other, because they know that, if there's a Democrat and a Republican in a runoff in a very blue state like California, something very, very extreme would have to happen for the Republican to win. So I do think that Bonta is going to get in. And he has been such I'll just say it this way to be polite to the Attorney General, such an ally to the public employee unions, the private sector unions, and everything that he does, that I think that they will be magnetically drawn to him, and he will be attractive as a candidate because he'll have that Attorney General title. And so I think that's my prediction. My prediction is Bonta gets in, and then Bonta becomes a thing, not because he's some sort of illuminating light or major figure, but California has a massive population, and talking to all of those voters costs a heck of a lot of money. And if you take this list of people running for governor of California and look at the amount of money they have in the bank, none of them really have enough money other than, Tom Steyer, the billionaire, will have enough money, but that's a guy who spent $170 million to get 2% in the South Carolina presidential primary. And I'm not sure voters are interested in buying what he's selling. So that's my prediction, Bonta.
Okay, so I'm with you on Harris. She doesn't like to work hard, and when you're governor, mayor, governor, president, you got to work hard, right? The bucks.
Well, and she's been in that White House, right? She's literally been as close to being president as you can be when you're not president, because she was the vice president for somebody who was lacking faculties. And so I think she had more input than anybody would ever have, with maybe with the exception of Dick Cheney, because I almost felt like, George W. Bush and Dick Cheney almost had a co-presidency, right? They were so close. But, and so you're in DC and a heartbeat away from running the country, it's kind of a step back to run for governor
So,
for her.
so part of what I find interesting here is you have these Congress people. You have Becerra, who had a pretty big job. Uh, why do you? It sort of amazes me how weak they are performing in these polling. Is it because they're never in California and have no name ID? They're just have
So
what?
I, I I think that in a large measure, the responsible party is presidential politics. America's politics has become nationalized. And everything, I mean, nobody sucks up all the oxygen in the room like Donald J. Trump, right? Whether you like him, whether you don't like him, he dominates the news cycle. And because Gavin Newsom has chosen a strategy, a fairly effective strategy, of deciding that he's going to be the kind of the chief troll of the president, and he's in the news cycle all the time, it's really hard to get oxygen for the who's going to be behind Newsom, because Newsom is ever present in the media every day, because he's in that presidential swirl, because he's the kind of the top critic in chief of the president. So I do think with the new year will come kind of a renewed focus on, okay, who is going to be running the largest state in the union? But none of that happened. And then, I think that the Prop 50 campaign was kind of the icing on the cake, when maybe in the last few months of the year, you might have seen a pivot to coverage of the governor's race in California, but instead it was more Newsom versus Trump and this massive campaign and so many pundits and everybody talking about it. And, Prop 50 ends, and then suddenly, it's Thanksgiving and the holidays. And so I do think there'll be a renewed focus on the governor's race come the first of the year. But even then, when you've got, I think we're up to 10 or 11 Democrats running, we're at least three, two major Republicans running, one who's trying to be major. We'll see what he does. And there's at least a fourth candidate out there that I keep hearing about who may jump in. And with all of those candidates, it's kind of like, how do you break out? I mean, imagine, we kind of saw this a few years ago with the presidential debates, but when you've got that many candidates on a stage, it's really hard to break out. As a matter of fact, you and I have talked about this before in the past, Tom, with these big debates. When you've got a dozen people on stage, you're not actually looking for that opportunity to shine. You're just wondering who's going to screw up and have that opportunity to kind of drop out. How do you winnow the field? What year was it where they had the presidential debate where they actually had to have the big kids table and the little kids table in order to accommodate all the candidates? And I feel like this time it's all the little kids table. Like there is no big kids table in that governor's debate for California. And so if you have one debate with 10 people over 90 minutes, somebody do the math, but it's not very much time to say anything but get your kind of zingers out there.
All
So
right. So you mentioned the Republicans. If we go back to that graphic, you have Steve Hilton, who worked in England with David Cameron.
yeah.
You have Bianco, the Riverside sheriff. We talked about this briefly a while back. You said, and you're talking about a huge state, not a lot of money. So he's going to have on the ballot sheriff. Steve Hilton's
Yeah.
on Newsmax every day every day of the week. Any handicapping on who you think might emerge higher among those two?
Well, here's what I would say. There's a couple of X factors out there that I think are very important to consider. The number one by far is, you know, I know that Hilton has a personal relationship with the president. The president has called him, especially when he was on Fox News, because one of Donald Trump's favorite things to do is if he sees something on Fox News, he just picks up the phone and calls whoever he saw say something great on Fox, and he just calls them. Because, like, this is the secret life of Tom Del Becara. If people watching this didn't know this, Tom just says, "Hey, please get me the president of India on the phone." And it's just, well, okay, maybe Tom doesn't have that, but the president does. You just name who you want, and they get him on the phone for you. So he's called Hilton and talked with Hilton. The question is whether or not Hilton wants a Trump endorsement, and if he wants it, can he get it? And if he gets it, will he have enough money to communicate to 5 million Republicans in California that he has it? If Hilton gets a Trump endorsement and can let Republicans know that he has it, it's over for Chad Bianco. I mean, the president is a dominant figure, but all of those things have to happen, and of course that and then you already brought up the other X factor, which is that absent that, being a county sheriff is when you get your ballot in the mail and you're a Republican, and if you haven't really heard much from anybody and you're just looking at the ballot, Republicans are, pretty law and order oriented individuals. And that's a very, very powerful ballot title. I don't know what Steve Hilton's ballot title will be, but it's not going to be sheriff. And so that becomes an inherent challenge for him. So my only prediction is that if Trump weighs in, kind of John McLaughlin style, the answer is Steve Hilton if Trump endorses. And if he doesn't, I would give an edge to Bianco if those are the two candidates running, with the final caveat, which is the unions. And if they decide to get involved and pick a candidate. So to put your listeners back through memory lane, we've had a couple of moments in California history with the playing of this top two primary. And for those of you who don't really kind of remember this thing, basically the rules are, everybody gets a ballot and everybody looks on the ballot and votes for whatever candidate they want of either party. And then the top two vote getters advance to November, regardless of their political party. It used to be that the top Republican would advance, the top Democrat would advance, the top Libertarian, top Green Party member. And so you kind of knew that your top Republican would face the top Democrat. That's not the case anymore. And so we see a lot of game playing. When Gavin Newsom was running for re-election, he decided that Brian Dahle, the state senator from Northern California representing the state of Jefferson, right out of central casting, should be his opponent. So he ran television ads featuring himself and Brian Dahle and ran them on Fox News Channel and other places and boosted Dahle to make sure that was his opponent. Adam Schiff, he didn't want to face Katie Porter in a Democrat runoff, so he ran commercials featuring himself with Steve Garvey. And matter of fact, he spent 10 times what Steve Garvey had to spend at all just promoting Steve Garvey, and it was a brilliant play. And so into the general election went Adam Schiff and Steve Garvey. So I don't think that any of these Democrats, short of Steyer, is going to have the money to do that this go around, but the unions have the money to do that. So
Yeah,
we'll
so
see what happens.
we can help out the viewers because you've done politics all around the country, helping with initiatives and yeoman's work. But the unions in California are something else, especially the Teachers Association. They're not only take taxpayer money and lobby with it, and I think they're in the top 2 or 3 every year in spending, right? But
They're up
they
there
are,
with the oil companies.
yeah, there you go. But uh, when it comes to elections, they're the big player. They go ahead.
Yeah, they and then right behind them is SEIU 1000, the big state employee service union, and they will play big. Like I said, they will have a big outsized role in picking the nominee, especially because the candidates themselves aren't really raising what I would call amounts of money. I mean, maybe this is a good perspective for the people watching to gauge what money means. If you want to put a TV ad on in Los Angeles for a week, 1 week, right? At a level where people will see it and it will make a difference. That's about $4 million for 1 week in Los Angeles. And you're talking, I mean, there's most of these candidates haven't raised 1 million, let alone $2 to $3 million. And when you put that in perspective, and then you say, well, at the end, these unions come in with $100 million, and they say, okay, that'll put the candidate we want on the media in the Bay Area, Los Angeles, San Diego, Central Valley for a whole month. And don't think that they're not the ones talking with the loudest megaphone rather than the candidates. And it's a bizarre system. It's an unfortunate system. Tom and I have had long conversations before about FDR's position that public employees shouldn't even be able to unionize, let alone this role that they play, picking the people that they then negotiate with on the other side of the table. It's an awful scenario. So yeah, so
And one of the reasons why California has a $300 billion budget, massive deficit, pension crisis for as far as the eye can see. It'll never get paid off. Their power is unbelievable. Let's shift a little. You raised Prop 50. If it doesn't get overturned, you have some
right.
interesting on Republican races down south and even up north. What do you make about the Ken Calvert fight with young Kim?
Yeah. So I think it is a tall hill. We're going to probably hear. I don't know when this is getting broadcast, but we're taping this on Friday morning, and I think we're going to hear from the court today. And it's unlikely that the courts are going to rule to it's they're not really hearing the merits for the long term. It's whether they issue an emergency injunction saying that the old line should be used or not. And the U.S. Supreme Court did some pretty strong signaling in their majority opinion that they were equating the Texas redraw, which they upheld, to the California redraw. And the biggest fear of any federal judge is getting overturned on appeal. So that's going to be a very strong message to them. But to answer your question, I think there's only one Republican on Republican primary that's been created because of, we have 9 Republicans in Congress now. It's going to dwindle now to 4 or 5. And the one district where they shoved 2 Republicans into one very, very ruby red district is where you've got senior Republican Ken Calvert, the dean of the California Republican delegation. He's been in Congress since 1992. He is the chairman of the Appropriations Subcommittee for all military contracting, very influential fellow. And he's been thrust into a district where also residing there is Congresswoman Young Kim, who's kind of a more moderate Republican from Orange County. And it's just going to be very interesting to see how that sorts itself out. Calvert currently represents 50% of that district. Young Kim represents about 35% of it. Both of them will raise tremendous amounts of money. Outside groups will participate. I really couldn't tell you who's going to emerge in that. I mean, I'd give an edge on paper to Ken Calvert. I also think that, Young Kim, who's a personal friend, she and I have worked together in the past. She's got a challenge back in when Donald Trump was contesting the outcome of the 2020 election, and the Democrats had the House, and they decided they were going to impeach the president. Young Kim, who's a proud member of what they call the Problem Solvers Caucus in Washington. It's really the mod squad of the mod Dems and the mod Republicans. They came up with this idea where, hey, why don't we settle this by, instead of impeaching the president, let's just come up with a resolution strongly condemning what he's doing. And so Young Kim signed off as a co-author of this resolution, which then Speaker Pelosi never gave the light of day. She went on to go ahead and do the actual impeachment. But now Young Kim's got to live with the fact that clearly Ken Calvert's going to let Republicans know that Young Kim wanted to condemn Donald Trump. And that may or may not cause Trump to get involved, but it's certainly going to be impactful. So it's going to be negative and nasty. And by the way, this is on purpose. I mean, if you look on a map, Young Kim's home is 5 minutes from the edge of one end of the district, and you could throw a football from Ken Calvert's front lawn into the district next door. This was I believe, with a devilish smile, Paul Mitchell of Redistricting Partners said, let's put these 2 in one district and see how this plays out. So this is an ongoing headache of intention. by the Democrats, and it's unfortunate because both of them have been productive members of Congress. But it's like musical chairs. When the music stops,
Yeah.
every round they take out a chair, and so not everyone's going to have a chair. And there's a lot of Republicans that aren't going to have chairs next January, month from January.
Did you want to weigh in a little bit of the state of the Republican Party? And more importantly, if you could sit down with the current chair, what would you tell that person to do in 2026?
So the state of the California Republican Party is challenging, right? The first thing I would say is that a party is defined first and foremost by its elected officials. And we don't have any statewide Republicans in California. We don't have, I mean, our federal delegation is being decimated. For a while, we had the Speaker of the House from California. That was almost like a substitute, right? It's like, one of the most high profile Republicans in America is from California. So at the time, I think Speaker McCarthy spent a few years being the top Republican person in California. I have opinions about that, but from a pure kind of objective point of view, there was a definitive Republican elected official from California. Corin Rankin is dealing with the fact that there isn't one. And so it's really, really hard to define the party when your top elected office holders are on an obscure board of equalization that no one ever has ever heard of. No one cares about it. No one knows what it is. And so, if I'm Corin Rankin, you have to kind of realize that for now, the California Republican Party is kind of the head of a regional party. There are parts of California that are ruby red. There are parts of California that are purple. And what is your strategy as a party to excel in those areas? And then what you really need, frankly, which is, I think, out of reach for a party chair, is for a president of your party, maybe, to rally some very wealthy people and say, what's our 10 or 20-year strategy for California? How are we going to start to talk to Republicans? Or, there are entire areas of California where you're going to have people that are, 20, 30, 40 years old who can look you in the face and say, maybe I've met a Republican, but I don't know it if I did. I mean,
Yeah.
it's a sad reality. And so those are hard challenges to come by. So if I were her, I'd be focusing from the bottom up. Who are our prominent candidates for city council, for supervisor? I would be supporting, as best she can, our candidates for state assembly and state senate in those purple areas, and set expectations appropriately. If she wants to be weighed by whether or not she can win the governorship of California, she's going to be a very disappointed chairman because there are just not enough Republicans in California to make that a likely outcome. How's that for a rosy thing to say to
No,
a party chair? You've been
it's
one. What's your advice? You said at the beginning off camera that I'd be doing most of the talking, but you'd be doing some of it. So let me turn the tables. You've sat in the chair that Corin Rankin is in right now. What advice do you have for her?
Well, stop trying to hit grand slams. You see a lot of these chairs come in and think that one person is going to set the stage. That's not how you build a house. You could have the prettiest slate roof on earth, but you have to have a good foundation to start with. And I do think for a while, we cultivated the city council level and that type of thing, and that paid dividends long term because you got people who got experience and then could run for assembly. I'm a big fan of using initiatives not only to put a discrete resolution of a problem, right? There's a pothole. Here's how we're going to fix it. And Republicans have done well with that because this, as you know, we've had this consultant class and otherwise that have tried to make Republicans just nice. But at the end of the day, voters have problems and they want these problems fixed. And if you can put in an initiative that's on the ballot that says this is broken, this is how we're going to fix it, and you drive behind that, voter ID may rally some. We had Prop 36, although that doesn't get funded. Anybody who thinks Gavin Newsom for election results and respecting them, that's certainly not. But I think you do the ground up as you describe, and I think you put out initiatives because Republicans tend to rally around ideas, and independents do as well. And you start developing a a reputation of being effective and fixing things as opposed to yelling across the aisle and having these huge ideological fights. You could have an ideological fight among conservatives in Alabama, but here you've got to get that foothold. I've tried to focus on those kind of things. Thanks for asking. Um, you mentioned we don't have that much, but you mentioned Gavin Newsom. And I, like you, think he has done a great job of making himself the foil, right? He has risen
Yeah.
to the top. He's leading in the polls. Uh, I, for one, in my prediction section coming up, will say Kamala will not enter the race. She did not enter it Iowa the last time around. I was the first nationally. I said it on Fox that she wouldn't. You're convinced
You
he'll
think she's
run?
gonna she's gonna saber rattle and then ultimately figure out she doesn't have what it takes, and she's gonna say better to take a pass. You
So
want
tell
my
people.
Gavin Newsom? I'm going to
Yeah.
give you my Gavin Newsom related prediction, but it's not about. It is about his presidential run. But I figure if I'm going to make a bold prediction, I ought to make it right here.
Okay, but
So here's
before you
my
do that, I want you to know, a month ago, I had Carla Marinucci on,
yeah,
Chronicle,
good
survey
friend.
left of center. She said he peaked too early and couldn't win nationally. Your turn.
Oh well, I do think he's going to have problems nationally. I do think at some point people are going to wake up and say, you know what, we literally, and understand this is from the perspective of a Democrat. They're looking at Donald Trump in the White House and saying, we ran a California progressive against this guy. He ran ads talking about how Harris wanted to have sex change operations for transsexuals who were in prison. I got news for you. Gavin Newsom has the same position, although he's had every position on every issue as he jockeys around. But here's my actual prediction for Gavin Newsom. I believe that as the qualification occurs for the voter ID initiative, he will look at the polling, and before everybody blinks, he will endorse
No,
the
come
voter
on.
ID initiative for California
No,
because
come
he's not going to
on.
want to be on the wrong side of that issue. And it will be frustrating. We'll see 15 videos from Carl DeMaio having an aneurysm about it. But Gavin Newsom will look at it and he'll do what he always does. Hey, I've looked at it and it's just common sense. And he's going to use it as his way to try to demonstrate to national Democrats who think he's just going to be another Kamala Harris that he's a different sort of person. And he's going to spring off of that issue to try to demonstrate he's not lock, stock, and barrel predictable California left winger. So that's my
Wow.
prediction. He's going to use it. He's going to embrace it. And the good news is I think it's really going to take it's going to help it pass, but it's really going to take a little bit of the air out of the tires for it buoying Republicans in California as he seeks to make it a nonpartisan issue. So we'll see
Yeah.
what happens. But I've got it. I figured I owed you at least one bold prediction.
That certainly freaking qualifies. Let me ask you this. Does he get the nomination?
He does not get the nomination. I agree with Carla sometimes, and in here I think he has peaked too early, and I do think we're going to get to a phase of this where people are going to start to say we can't afford to have what happened in 2024 happen in 2028, and moving another California Democrat, former mayor of San Francisco, who has been progressive on so many issues to the forefront. I think they're going to have a problem with that. That having been said, I'll give Newsom this: that group of 3 or 4 thousand left wingers who will be the delegates to the national convention are not exactly representative of middle America. So we'll see what happens. I will tell you this: I think if he is the nominee, he will never be president.
Oh, wow. Nancy Pelosi said Donald Trump will never. That sounded very familiar to me.
Well, there you go. It's
Um,
nice to know that as we cap off the show, that you've compared me to Carla Marinucci and to Nancy Pelosi. This is where I am.
this is where you hang up on me and say,
I would never do that. So I have too much
all right,
respect for you. And
all right, John. Look, we're gonna. Hopefully, you'll come back, folks.
sure,
If you don't know John Fleischman, look, he's in some ways he's a living encyclopedia. I don't mean to age you, but John lives and breathes this stuff, and he knows California as well as anyone out there. Certainly, anyone on the right side of the aisle. But if you want to keep up with him, and you better get your track shoes on because he's got the information. So does it matter.com. Did I say it right? So does it
You got it.
matter.com
Right.
is your destination. Join that.
Sign up. We have a free newsletter. Sign up, get stuff to your inbox, and then you can be as smart as Tom Del Vaccaro. Actually, you have a leg up on Tom because you'll be well rested. Tom has a absolutely beautiful little one who I'm sure is impinging on his sleep. So
No doubt about it. We this episode, we're especially recording you this when I flew all night and didn't get one bit of sleep with that child. So John, happy Hanukkah to you. Best in the holidays, and congratulations on your continuing success. Thanks for coming on, and we'll be back on Politics
all
in
right,
Perspective.
take care.
Hey, welcome back to Politics in Perspective. Once again, thank you to Ex American News, AUN TV, worldviewtube.com for carrying us. And hope you like John, very knowledgeable. California is going to be a player. We're going to talk about predictions right now. For me, going into the new year, still a chance to get lessons of the American civilization for that special someone or the divided era. So let's go with my 2026 predictions. By the way, I predicted at the end of the year the stock market would be at 48,000. It's hovering there right now. We got a couple weeks to go. I may be slow. I may be understated, and the Santa Claus rally may go higher. So the two big issues. This is easy, right? Obviously, the economy is a big issue, but my prediction within that is what matters. At least that's why I'm giving it to you. And then my prediction related to the president. So let's go with the economy. Back in 2017, I helped Steve Moore get messaging out related to the Trump tax bill to come. That December, I said the second quarter of 2018 would have growth above 3.5%, which Obama never had growth above 3%. I think I was the most aggressive. It was actually higher than that. I said that nationally. So I like talking econ, one of my first loves. The economy will be humming next year. And all this noise you're hearing right now about affordability and everything else, yes, it matters. But the Democrats are being as loud as they can possibly be right now because they don't have anything to talk about for themselves. They have no plans. What they would do, they wanted to do $1.5 trillion in new spending for the shutdown. So whatever they would do would trash the economy again. But Trump has done all the right things. Deregulation, you lower the cost of doing business and you make it easier to supply goods. And the more goods and services are out there, the more prices come down. The tax changes. You have small businesses, the ability to write off 100% right away. That takes time. They don't get to, the bill doesn't pass in July and then the next day for some, but there has to be this warm up to this where they make their adjustments and get there. But the no new tax or no taxes on tips and things like that is going to be very important. And it's going to juice the economy. The beginning of the foreign investments will happen next year. Not a ton of it, right? But that is starting. The AI boom. AI increases productivity. You heard all the stories about how it's going to cost jobs. But you know what kind of jobs it isn't costing? That is construction jobs. Excuse me, in the places where they're building these data centers. Wall Street Journal had an article 10 days ago or so showing that wages for construction workers were up 30%. If you remember long enough ago, the oil boom in North Dakota, not only did their wages rise, but they were paying bonuses for people to come work at McDonald's because there was a labor shortage. That's how you raise wages. You expand the economy so fast that there's a demand and a competition for wages and laborers. So that part of the AI boom is going to help. And of course, lower energy prices because it filters through everything. So you will see growth above 4% next year, which the Biden administration only got through inflation. But if you adjusted for inflation, it really wasn't there. Obama never had it. And you didn't have it for that long a period under the Bushes. So this, he set the table. So my prediction is the economy will drown out the Democrats when it hits over 4%. That brings us to my second prediction, and that has to do with presidential politics. Now you're saying, oh, it's only 2026. We haven't even had the midterms. Will Republicans hold the Senate? Yes, they will. Redistricting will help them, and the economy, free prediction here, will help them hold on to the House, even if it's barely like it is now. But who's running for president has already started. Anybody who says that, oh, I'm just considering it, means that they have friends out there that will help them with their exploratory committee. Nobody considers running for president. They, they're into it. They want to do it. The faces I show you here among the Democrats, everybody talks about them. Every one of them will have an exploratory committee. What's an exploratory committee? That's your initial committee where you gauge interest, money comes in. It's not an official campaign, but it gets you out there and gets your name out there. All of these people will have an exploratory committee, but it's unlikely that all of them will actually run. We've already talked with John. Kamala Harris isn't going to run. The reason for that is the hangover about her wasting all the money, all of her word salads. But the big pillar in this as to why she can't run is because Gavin Newsom is going to take all the Democrat delegates in California, and there's no path to victory for her. So all of them will have exploratory committees. Gavin Newsom will be among the first to announce right after the election at the end of November, December at the latest, he'll be in. Which brings us to the next part as we wind up quickly here, which is the Republicans. Those people are considered interested. Now, J.D. Vance is running away with it in the polls. He's tied 100% to Trump. If Trump succeeds, his boat's lifted. If Trump fails for whatever reason, J.D. Vance will have troubles. Right now, it looks like he's going to get the nomination. He's at 40-something%, and nobody else is at 10. But the one thing you need to remember is somebody is going to hang around in case something happens to J.D. Vance. Somebody has to pick it up, like Bill Clinton did when George Bush Senior was at 91% in the polling. He hung around and he wound up being president. My producer says I'm out of time. Happy holidays, Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah. Please buy my books as gifts, and we'll see you in the new year. Thanks so much for supporting Politics in Perspective. I'm Tom Del Beccaro. See you soon.